Imagine standing on the edge of a war where every bullet matters, every decision can determine the fate of nations, and one wrong move could cost tens of thousands of lives. Now imagine that the key to victory isn't a new weapon, a larger army, or superior firepower, but a single dead body floating in the sea, carrying a briefcase full of lies. It sounds like the plot of an espionage thriller, something dreamed up in a writer's room. But in 1943, during the darkest days of World War II, the survival of Allied forces hinged on one of the most audacious deception operations ever attempted. A plan so bizarre, so risky, and so delicately constructed that if even one detail went wrong, the consequences would have been catastrophic. This wasn't just a mission. It was a gamble with history itself. A carefully engineered illusion designed to fool one of the most meticulous intelligence networks in the world. This is the true story of Operation Mincemeat, the mission that used imagination, boldness, and deception to reshape the war, the crisis the Allies faced. By early 1943, the Allies knew they needed to invade southern Europe to gain a foothold against the Axis powers. The obvious target was Sicily. It was the gateway to Europe, a strategic stepping stone for Allied troops. Every military strategist knew it, and more importantly, the Germans knew it. Sicily was heavily fortified. Troops, artillery, mines, and defenses covered the shoreline. If the Allies attacked head-on, thousands, maybe tens of thousands, would be slaughtered before they even reached the beaches. The Allies couldn't change geography, but maybe they could change perception. If they could convince Hitler that the invasion was coming somewhere else, Greece, Sardinia, the Balkans, he might pull forces away from Sicily. That was the only way to save lives and secure a path into Europe. The challenge? Germany's intelligence services were ruthless. They were skeptical. They cross-checked everything. Only a deception so daring, so precise, and so believable could infiltrate the minds of Nazi command. That's when two British officers, sitting in a cluttered room filled with typewriters, maps, and cigarette smoke, proposed an idea no one saw coming. What if they could deliver fake, secret documents to the Germans so convincingly that the enemy would reorganize their entire defense strategy? And what if the best way to deliver those documents was by attaching them to a corpse? The birth of a crazy plan. The plan was born from a mix of desperation and creativity. Intelligence officers Charles Cholmondeley and Ewan Montagu realized the Germans trusted documents that appeared to be found rather than delivered. If something looked like it was never meant to be discovered, it gained authenticity. So the idea formed: plant fake letters on a body, disguise it as a British officer who supposedly died in a plane crash, and let the tide wash him onto the shores of Nazi-controlled territory. The Germans would examine the papers. They would believe the man died accidentally during a flight, and they would assume those documents were real. But to make this work, everything had to feel painfully authentic. The identity, the clothing, the background story, the personal items, even the emotional details of the life he would have led. This wasn't just a body. This was an illusion, one that had to survive the scrutiny of trained spies. The team needed a corpse. They needed the right location. They needed a believable chain of events. And they needed to create a man who never existed. Creating the perfect spy who never lived. Finding a suitable body was the first challenge. They needed a man who could pass as an officer who died in cold water. Eventually, they obtained the body of a homeless man who had died under circumstances that matched the cover story. But finding a body was only the beginning. They needed to transform him into a fully fleshed-out officer, Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. Major Martin needed documents, identification, and a complete life story. But most importantly, he needed character. The team built his identity piece by piece. A worn wallet containing photos, receipts, to make it look like he had been living normally. A love letter from a fictional fiancé. A stern letter from his father. A bill for a night out. A used bus ticket. Keys, loose change, and ordinary pocket clutter. Every detail mattered. Spies notice small inconsistencies. One wrong date or unfamiliar brand of item could expose the trick. Many of the documents were made intentionally imperfect, slightly smudged, casually folded, or carrying fingerprints to make everything more believable. Then came the main element, a briefcase handcuffed to Major Martin's wrist. Inside were top-secret letters between high-ranking Allied generals detailing their supposed invasion plans. According to the fake correspondence, the Allies were preparing to invade Greece, not Sicily. This wasn't simply a false lead. It was bait. Bait the Allies hoped the Germans would swallow whole. The journey of the body. The next challenge was perhaps the most delicate phase of Operation Mincemeat, delivering the body to a place where the Germans would find it without ever suspecting British involvement. Every stage had to look accidental, natural, and completely beyond Allied control. If anything looked staged, the operation would collapse before it even had a chance to begin. After studying diplomatic behavior, German intelligence habits, and the movement patterns of local fishermen, the planners chose the southern coast of Spain. On paper, Spain was officially neutral. In reality, it was crawling with German operatives who maintained close relationships with key Spanish officials. Messages traveled quickly. Rumors moved even faster. If a body washed ashore carrying classified documents, word would reach Berlin within hours. That made Spain the perfect stage for their deception. But simply leaving the body near the coast was impossible. British forces couldn't appear to be intentionally planting it. They had to release it far enough offshore for the discovery to look like a tragic accident at sea. That required a submarine, precise navigation, and perfect timing. To preserve the corpse during travel, they placed it inside a sealed metal canister filled with dry ice. When the lid shut, it wasn't just storing a body, it was carrying the future of an entire campaign. The submarine crew knew exactly what was inside, yet they treated the canister like sacred cargo. It wasn't a weapon, but in many ways, it was more powerful than any torpedo they carried. The journey took days. The submarine glided beneath dark waters, engines humming quietly, as the men aboard whispered about the unimaginable mission they were helping execute. Inside the cold metal cylinder was a man who had never existed, and yet his fabricated life might save tens of thousands of real soldiers preparing for the invasion of Sicily. One wrong move, one mechanical error, one curious inspection from an enemy patrol could unravel everything. Finally, the submarine reached its destination, the waters off the coast of Huelva. The location was chosen with incredible care. The tides tended to wash items directly toward the beach. More importantly, Huelva was known for having one of the most active German intelligence networks in the region. If anything suspicious washed ashore, it would inevitably pass into German hands. Before dawn, under a pale shroud of morning mist, the submarine surfaced. The sea was calm, eerily calm, as though the ocean itself understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. Two officers opened the canister, gently removed the body, and performed a quick final check of the uniform, the documents, the personal effects. Everything had to be perfect. Then, with quiet reverence, they pushed the body into the water. For a moment, it drifted alongside the submarine, gently rising and falling with the waves. Then the current began to pull it toward the shore. The men watched in silence. They weren't sending off an object, they were sending off a narrative they had painstakingly crafted. A lie so elaborate and so human that even experienced intelligence officers might believe it without question. As the submarine slipped beneath the waves and disappeared, the body continued its lonely journey. Hours later, just as the planners had predicted, local fishermen spotted a figure floating near the coast. They hauled the body onto their boat, confused and alarmed. Soon the Spanish authorities were notified, setting in motion a chain of events that unfolded exactly as the Allies had hoped. But uncertainty loomed. Would the Spaniards share the documents with their German contacts? Would the Germans take the bait? Would they believe the forged letters outlining the false plan for an invasion of Greece and Sardinia instead of Sicily? Or would they uncover the deception and ruin everything the Allies had built? This was the moment where truth and fiction merged. The body had reached the shore. The story had entered the world. Now the fate of the entire operation, and of thousands of Allied soldiers, depended on whether the enemy could be convinced by a man who had never lived, carrying secrets that were never real. The most daring deception in modern warfare was officially underway. The spies take the bait. Spain returned the body to British officials, but not before German agents secretly examined the documents. This was precisely what the Allies wanted. Germany's intelligence network was skilled, but also eager. They believed real documents were rarely given. They were usually found. And this story, a tragic plane crash, a washed-up officer, a handcuffed briefcase, was too compelling to ignore. The Germans photographed the documents. They created copies. They analyzed every detail. They traced the officer's supposed movements. They inspected the letters between generals. And they fell for it. Not only did they conclude the documents were genuine, they became convinced that the Allies had accidentally lost one of their most sensitive plans. The deception was working, but the final confirmation didn't come from secret intelligence. It came from actions. Germany began shifting troops. Divisions were moved from Sicily to Greece. Panzer units were put on alert. Defensive structures in Sicily were weakened. Commanders argued over the credibility of the information, but Hitler himself believed it. He declared Greece the primary target of the Allied invasion. The illusion had succeeded. The real invasion begins. When Allied troops landed in Sicily in July 1943, the reality on the ground was almost surreal compared to what they had been prepared for. Instead of the fierce, heavily fortified defenses intelligence had warned them about, they encountered positions that were understrength, poorly organized, and in many places nearly abandoned. German and Italian forces, expecting a massive assault somewhere else entirely, were caught off guard. Confusion reigned among commanders, communications were fragmented, and units that should have been coordinating defenses were instead scrambling to understand what was happening. The beachheads were secured with far fewer casualties than planners had feared, and the Allied soldiers pressed inland with remarkable momentum. Every step they took, every mile they gained, underscored the profound impact of a deception operation that had unfolded months earlier. Thousands of miles away, a corpse floating in the sea had carried forged documents that convinced Hitler and his generals that the real invasion target was Greece. Entire German divisions were redeployed to the wrong locations. Defensive fortifications in Sicily remained incomplete, and the element of surprise rested firmly in the Allies' favor. Operation Mincemeat was more than a clever ruse, it was a strategic masterstroke. The invasion of Sicily was the first step in the Allied campaign to penetrate the Axis stronghold of southern Europe, and it succeeded with a swiftness that might not have been possible without the meticulously planned deception. Beyond the immediate military victory, the operation had far-reaching political consequences. The failure to defend Sicily effectively weakened Mussolini's grip on Italy. His regime, already strained by internal dissent and military setbacks, collapsed rapidly after news of the invasion spread. By the time Allied forces pushed through the island and set their sights on the Italian mainland, Italy was a nation teetering on the brink of surrender. The operation also reshaped German strategy. Forced into a defensive posture earlier than anticipated, the Wehrmacht had to divert critical resources to cover gaps created by their misjudgment. Troops, armor, and supplies were rerouted to areas that never faced a real threat, leaving other fronts weaker and more vulnerable. This strategic misallocation created openings for Allied advances in mainland Italy and eventually contributed to the broader push into Nazi-occupied Europe. All of this less bloodshed on Sicily's beaches, the toppling of Mussolini, the strategic dislocation of German forces, traced back to a single act of extraordinary creativity and audacity: the use of a dead man to carry falsified intelligence. Major William Martin, a fabricated officer with a fabricated mission, became one of history's most unlikely instruments of victory. His briefcase of forged documents changed enemy calculations, altered defensive deployments, and directly influenced the outcome of the Sicilian campaign. It is rare in the annals of war for a single deception to have such cascading effects. Yet Operation Mincemeat proved that intelligence, creativity, and psychological insight could be as decisive as firepower and manpower. A corpse in the ocean, a forged identity, and a daring plan executed with precision reshaped the course of the war. By the time the Allied forces pressed onto the Italian mainland, they were not just invading an enemy stronghold, they were walking into a path painstakingly cleared by strategy, ingenuity, and the audacious imagination of a few brilliant minds. In the end, the landing in Sicily stands as a testament to the power of deception, proving that in war, sometimes the deadliest weapon is not a bullet or a bomb, but an idea conceived, executed, and believed by the enemy. A dead man had indeed changed the direction of history. Behind the scenes of deception. What made Operation Mincemeat so extraordinary wasn't just the audacious and almost surreal nature of the plan, it was the painstaking attention to detail, the collaboration of brilliant minds, and the unexpected emotional weight that accompanied their work. To the casual observer, the idea of floating a dead body with a briefcase full of forged documents might seem like a plot lifted from a spy novel. But for the officers at the heart of the operation, it was a task that required precision, imagination, and a deep understanding of human behavior. Every choice carried consequences. Every small inconsistency could unravel the entire deception. The intelligence officers responsible for Major William Martin's creation approached the task with a remarkable combination of professionalism and empathy. They weren't simply fabricating a persona, they were constructing an entire life, a detailed and coherent identity that could withstand scrutiny from the most meticulous enemy intelligence service in the world. They decided that Martin would have a fiancée, Pam, and one officer even assumed the role of Pam, composing letters that expressed affection, longing, and everyday personal concerns. These letters were not mere props. They were carefully written to be casual, believable, and emotionally convincing, capturing the rhythms and nuances of a relationship that never existed but had to feel real to anyone who read it. But the work went far beyond love letters. They imagined every aspect of Martin's personality, his daily habits, his likes and dislikes, and even his ambitions. They debated endlessly about the minutiae, the receipts in his wallet, the bus tickets in his pockets, the trivial documents he might carry. Should there be a photograph? If so, whose face should it show? What brand of cigarettes would he smoke? How would he behave under stress? These were not trivial questions. Every detail added to the authenticity of the ruse and increased the likelihood that the Germans would believe Martin's identity and the documents he carried. There was also humor and camaraderie among the officers, a way of coping with the oddity of their task. They joked about Martin as if he were a real colleague, playfully arguing over what he would do in various scenarios. Yet beneath the levity was a profound sense of responsibility. One officer later admitted that he felt a moral duty to Major Martin, as if the fictional soldier, carried by the body of a man unknown to them, deserved respect, dignity, and remembrance. The team wasn't just creating a tool for deception, they were honoring the life they had borrowed to execute it. When the mission concluded successfully, they ensured that Martin received the respect due to a real serviceman. He was buried with full military honors in Spain, a gesture that immortalized him in the records of war, even though the man beneath the uniform had lived a completely different life. Decades later, visitors still pause at Major William Martin's grave, unaware of the elaborate fiction that underpins it, yet moved by the solemnity of the tribute. The genius of Operation Mincemeat lay not only in fooling the enemy, but in its profound understanding of psychology. It exploited human tendencies to trust appearances, to overanalyze small details, and to make assumptions about honesty, loss, and tragedy. The plan demonstrated that wars are not solely won through sheer strength, numerical superiority, or advanced weaponry. Intelligence, creativity, and insight into human belief can alter the course of events in ways that raw force alone never could. Operation Mincemeat remains a testament to the extraordinary ingenuity, collaboration, and emotional depth of those who conceived it. By blending meticulous detail with bold imagination, the planners transformed a corpse into one of the most effective instruments of deception in history. In doing so, they proved that sometimes the deadliest weapon in war is not a gun or a bomb, but a story so convincing that even the most vigilant enemy cannot ignore it. German failure and Allied genius. What made Operation Mincemeat successful wasn't German stupidity. In fact, German intelligence examined the documents thoroughly. They questioned the authenticity. They analyzed everything. But the brilliance of the plan was its subtlety. The documents didn't shout their importance. They whispered it. The letters seemed boring. They seemed routine. They avoided dramatic language. They never explicitly mentioned Greece. The implication was hidden in plain sight. It felt real precisely because it wasn't trying too hard. And when Spain refused to return the documents immediately, another detail the Allies counted on it added legitimacy. If this were fake, German officers thought, why would the British fight so hard to get them back? Every suspicion was answered by a perfectly placed detail. Operation Mincemeat worked because it felt natural. It felt unplanned. It felt like a genuine accident. That's the true genius of deception. The aftermath and the silence that followed. When the war ended, the people involved in Operation Mincemeat didn't rush to tell the world. Their work remained secret for decades. Some of them carried the weight of their decisions quietly. Some felt pride. Some felt sadness for the unknown man whose body had been used. Some wondered whether history would ever understand the importance of what they had done. Their silence was part of the job. Their success remained a secret victory. But the legacy of Operation Mincemeat lived on. It inspired future deception strategies. It taught militaries the value of psychological warfare. It showed that wars can turn on ideas as much as on armies. When the story finally emerged, historians realized how close the world had come to a different outcome. Without this operation, the invasion of Europe could have failed. The war could have dragged on. More lives would have been lost. A body in the ocean saved millions. Operation Mincemeat wasn't about strength, it was about intelligence. It wasn't about force, it was about foresight. It wasn't about firepower, it was about understanding the enemy's mind. And in the end, it proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon in war is a story the enemy believes. Operation Mincemeat remains one of the boldest deception missions ever executed, a moment when creativity saved lives. A corpse carried the future of Europe, and a lie helped bring the war one step closer to its end. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the daring operations that shaped history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week, we uncover the untold stories, secret missions, and extraordinary heroes who changed the course of the world, stories you won't hear anywhere else. Don't miss the next chapter of history. Join us and be part of the journey.